The shadows you've been running from are not your enemies. That cold, tightening grip in your chest when you think about starting, that paralyzing whisper telling you it's too late or that you aren't enough, that is not a wall. It is a doorway. We have been conditioned to look at failure as a funeral, a finality, a cold slab of stone where dreams go to rot. But I am here to tell you that failure is the greatest masquerade in the history of human achievement. Napoleon Hill once whispered a truth to a world reeling from collapse. Every adversity, every failure, every heartbreak carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Read those words again. He didn't say it carries the harvest. He said it carries the seed. A seed is small. A seed is buried in the dirt. It is surrounded by darkness and pressured by the weight of the earth. To the seed, the world feels like it is ending, but in reality, the world is just beginning. Look at the giants who walked before us. Think of Thomas Edison, standing amidst the charred remains of his laboratory. Decades of work, millions of dollars in equipment, prototypes of a future yet born, all reduced to gray ash in a single night. Most men would have felt the ghost of defeat settle into their bones. Most would have looked at the flames and seen the end of their legacy. But Edison stood there, his face illuminated by the fire, and told his son, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." He wasn't delusional. He was practicing the alchemy of the soul. He knew that the fire had burned away the mistakes, the outdated theories, and the clutter. It cleared the ground for a new foundation. Within weeks, he was back at the bench. He didn't just recover, he transcended. You see, the fear of failure is actually a fear of judgment. You aren't afraid of the fall. You're afraid of who is watching when you hit the ground. You are worried about the opinions of people who are too afraid to even stand up. But listen closely. The man who never fails is the man who never breathes. Success is not a straight line. It is a jagged, brutal, beautiful climb through the wreckage of your former selves. Every time you stumble, every time the world says no, every time your bank account hits zero or your heart breaks in two, you are being handed a gift. It is a piece of raw material that only the fire of struggle can forge into greatness. We live in an age of polished surfaces and instant gratification, where we see the crown but never the cross. We see the billionaire in the boardroom, but we don't see the years he spent sleeping on a floor, eating the bitter bread of rejection. We see Henry Ford's empire, but we forget he went bankrupt 5 times before a single Model T rolled off the line. 5 times the world told him he was a fool. 5 times the experts laughed at his vision of a horseless carriage. If Ford had listened to the fear, if he had let the sting of the first bankruptcy dictate his identity, the world would still be in the dark ages of transportation. But he had a definiteness of purpose. He had a burning desire that acted as a chemical catalyst, turning the lead of failure into the gold of achievement. This burning desire is the only thing that can incinerate fear. Fear and faith cannot occupy the same space at the same time. They are both products of the imagination. Fear is the imagination used destructively. Faith is the imagination used constructively. When you obsess over what might go wrong, you are literally praying for the things you don't want. You are placing an order with the universe for disaster, but when you adopt the philosophy of the seed of success, you change your internal frequency. You begin to understand that life is not happening to you, it is happening for you. Even the bad parts, especially the bad parts. Think of Andrew Carnegie arriving in a new land with nothing but the clothes on his back and a hunger in his spirit. He didn't see poverty as a prison, he saw it as a training ground. He saw it as the necessary friction required to sharpen his resolve. He understood that the law of compensation is always at work. If you put in the work, if you maintain the vision, the universe is obligated to pay you back with interest. The average person stops at the first sign of opposition. They take no as a command to retreat, but the master knows that no is merely the beginning of the negotiation. Abraham Lincoln faced a litany of failures that would have crushed 1,000 lesser men. Lost jobs, failed businesses, the death of his sweetheart, nervous breakdowns, and defeat after defeat in the political arena. He was a man well acquainted with grief and the cold wind of public rejection. Yet he didn't view these moments as signals to quit. He viewed them as the necessary tempering of a blade. By the time the weight of a fracturing nation was placed on his shoulders, his spirit was made of tempered steel. He could carry the burden because he had been strengthened by the very failures he refused to let define him. You must realize that your mind is a garden. If you do not consciously plant the seeds of vision and purpose, the weeds of fear will grow by default. Fear doesn't need an invitation. It is a squatter. It moves in the moment you leave the door of your mind unguarded. And the most common weed is the fear of failure. It tells you to play it safe. It tells you to stay in the shallow water where you can touch the bottom. But there is no glory in the shallows. The great prizes of life, the deep fulfillment, the legacy that outlives your physical body, those are found in the deep, where the waves are high and the risk is real. To kill the fear of failure, you must first kill the idea that failure is a permanent state. It is not. It is a temporary defeat. There is a massive psychological difference between being defeated and being a failure. You are only a failure when you accept the defeat as final, when you stop trying, when you lay down your tools and walk away from the forge. Until that moment, you are simply a student in the harshest, most effective school on earth. Consider the Wright brothers. They weren't scientists with massive government grants. They were bicycle mechanics. They didn't have the right credentials, but they had an obsession. Every time their glider crashed into the sand at Kitty Hawk, they didn't see a disaster. They saw data. They saw a flaw in the wing's curve. They saw a problem with the rudder. They were failing their way to flight. Every crash was a lesson. Every broken strut was an instruction manual on how to build it stronger. They didn't fear the crash because they knew the crash held the secret to the sky. What is your Kitty Hawk? What is the thing you are so afraid of crashing that you won't even take it out of the hangar? You are waiting for the perfect conditions. You are waiting for the wind to be just right, for the crowds to be supportive, for your confidence to be unshakable. But confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the child of action. You don't get confident to start. You start to get confident. The fear only dies when you look it in the eye and move toward it anyway. The mastermind principle tells us that we can borrow the strength and experience of others, but no one can take the step for you. You must develop a success consciousness. This is a mental state where you are so tuned into your objective that failure becomes an impossibility. It becomes nothing more than a detour. If the road is blocked, you find another way. If the bridge is out, you build a boat. You don't question whether you will arrive. You only focus on the next step of the journey. This is the mindset of the conqueror. This is the spirit of Disney, who was fired by a newspaper editor because he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. Imagine that. The man who created a world of imagination was told he had none. If he had accepted that failure, the world would be a much darker, less magical place. But he used that rejection as fuel. He turned the sting of defeat into the spark of creation.